This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Can I ask everyone please to make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions? Can I now ask our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies received from the Assembly Member Desai, Assembly Member Clark and Assembly Member Mahfouz. Assembly Member Baker and Assembly Member Moema are here as substitutes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So before we get to our main item, we have a couple of bits short housekeeping to do. So can I quickly ask members to note the recommendations set out at item 2 regarding declarations of interest and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Noted. Excellent. Summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the actions arising from its previous meetings? Speedy. Excellent. So we now move on to our main item, which is a discussion focusing on the 2025-26 GLA Group budget. The meeting will be split into 3 parts. The first part will focus on GLA Group financials, the second on the GLA Group collaboration programme, and the last section on equalities. I'm imagining, with my famously accurate crystal ball, we'll probably go to about 12 or maybe slightly after 12 on the first panel, at which point we'll take short 5-minute adjournment stroke comfort break to swap over. So if I could then welcome our first panel of guests, which is Faye Hammond. Good morning, Faye, who is the Chief Finance Officer for the GLA, and Elliot Ball. Morning, Elliot, who is the Interim Director, Group Finance and Performance at the GLA. So if I kick off, Faye, with a sort of opening question, what do you think are the biggest macroeconomic risks to the GLA body's draft budgets, and how are you managing those at a group perspective?
So morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk about the budget. So one of the biggest things that we're seeing, or we want to make sure we understand as a group, is the overall macro context that we're working on in terms of growth. So we know that growth at the moment is low overall. We also want to make sure that the group overall think about the inflationary costs that are affecting our budgets as well. And in addition to that, thinking around actually, they're probably the main things, actually, inflation, just low growth that we've been focusing on and thinking about in terms of the budget process. And what that means for the budget process generally is not just for us as a public sector, but some of the partners that we're working with as well. So those macroeconomic situations are also affecting them and their cost pressures. People like boroughs, for example, are also experiencing some, some of the historic inflationary challenges. I know it's now low, but historic inflationary challenges, the interest rate rises that we've had, and those wider low growth environment. In particular relation to the group, TfL is a particular area of risk in relation to growth and inflation costs. The cost of living crisis means, and the way that people's travel behaviours change, that's a particular area of where we see macroeconomic impact. And then the other area is construction costs, which feature across the GLA budget and actually the whole sector in terms of providing. So those are the key things. In terms of how we're managing that, or how I'm thinking about that as CFO, I'm assuring myself that the CFOs of each of those bodies have thought about that they've got information in their budgets that demonstrate that they've thought about inflation and how how they're managing that. Obviously, I pay attention to the CFOs' financial statements around what they feel about their own financial positions as well, and have conversations with them about how they're managing that. So I get assurance around that process. So that gives you an idea of how I'm acting my role.
Great, thank you very much. You may not be aware, we had an entire meeting yesterday about housing, so construction inflation very much was the word of the day. It's 2 words. Yes. Thinking about the autumn statement we've just had, what was the impact of that on the GLA? And one of the things in that was about integrated settlements, which we've seen now coming forward for mayoralties elsewhere, West Midlands and Manchester. For London, there was a sort of teaser sentence that said maybe next year, maybe not. So I don't know if you've been having discussions about that, or if we know more than was in that brief government sentence.
And I'm certainly really happy to update the committee on that. And so in terms of the settlement, one of the good news for us is that we've got stability in our business rate, because it got confirmed that we would consider continuing the business rate growth. So that's good news for us in terms of continuity and stability of funding. Obviously, the other news for us is around UK SPF, around that being, the good news is it's continuing, albeit at a lower rate. So we need to understand what that means for London when we get the settlement, hopefully next week. We've got more money for housing. TfL had £485 million worth of funding for capital and core, their sort of capital costs, for example. After that, in November, there was a second announcement around the possibility of the precept and referendum limit on that, which was set, the decision around that hasn't been made yet, but it was set at £14, which is higher than we've got currently in the budget assumption, or the draft budget that you're considering at the moment. Obviously, that decision is still to come. But that gives you sort of a flavour of the impact of those announcements on our budget, and obviously we wait the announcements, as all from the finance sector do, for next week in terms of the final figures.
Okay.
I think if I covered everything.
In terms of the single settlement, I don't know.
Oh,
so
yes,
there's
I'd
no
love
more
to talk
news on
about
that, or
that,
if you've
actually.
started work thinking about what that might mean, presumably because London's total settlement is so much larger and more complex than, say, West Midlands.
Yeah, no, I'm really, really pleased to talk about that, actually. So what the document actually articulated was that the government wants to explore with London from 2026. We feel that's probably more of a firmer position than explore, and we're working forward on that basis. We're having conversations, sort of quite early conversations with the government around that settlement. What we've been doing as officers is having a look about what's already out there in the public domain. So, for example, there's quite a lot of information on the Memorandum of Understanding in relation to, although we're different, and we appreciate we're different from the mayoral corporation, so there's good information there for us. So there's memorandums of understanding out there, and just to give you a flavour of the kind of things that are in there. So what those documents talk about is the fact that those bodies at the moment have 40, 50 grants, and they'll in fact be merged into 5 or 6 pillars. And within those pillars, you'll have an opportunity to transfer between those pillars by up to 10%. In addition to that, though, the governance arrangements are quite different from what we're operating at the moment. The thing that I thought was quite interesting, and to explore, is around the outcomes. So it talks about thinking about outcomes and what would those performance indicators look like that we're able to be measured against in terms of outcomes. What the memorandum of understandings that are out there in relation to the Manchester and West Midlands talk about is no more money, but actually it's about the flexibility that it gives you, having that outcome framework and the ability to have, rather than these 50 grants, all with their own different kind of requirements to them, being able then to have that flexibility. And so we are working at that. We're looking at our existing funding that we have as a GLA and thinking about where they fit in the pillars and what that flexibility would mean for us. But it is at very early stages, because, as you can imagine, the government's thinking about what's happening at the moment with the others who are a bit further ahead in the process than we are.
Yeah. So the prize, I suppose, is single pot, single set of rules, more flexibility. I don't know whether we'll quite get to that utopia, but that's the goal. Where do London councils, I think, have been lobbying for a settlement as well?
Yes, they have.
Are they, because obviously they
actually
presumably have a different view about where the money should end up?
Well, we'd like to, I think, both, whether it's the GLA or London Council, I think what's really important is that we make sure those decisions are made in the place that is the right decision for London. So I think I'd hope that we would get to that place where there might be a different view on that, but that's the outcome both London councils want and also the GLA would want from that. And of course, London councils and GLA are having conversations about how that might work. Only this week, actually, officers from the GLA went across to London councils with ministers to just kind of solidify some of those relationships and that closer working.
Okay, but you're not, because obviously there's putting it less facetiously, there's obviously a tension between London councils who want more money for the boroughs, the GLA who would like more money for the mayor, or presumably the mayor bit of the GLA would like more money for the mayor. So there's, to some extent, if you take what you said about the government saying it's no more money, it's just more flexibility, then there's a sort of zero-sum negotiation there, isn't there, between the two?
Yeah, I mean, the memorandums of understanding for the ones I'm referring to talk about the roles of the existing councils in Manchester, except Westminster, being really clear about their role and that none of their statutory money coming to the mayoral corporation there. So there's quite a few rules in there. But I agree, this is a kind of bit of a tense area, and I think the next few months it will play out, won't it? How
okay. fair enough. And in terms of NI, I think last time you were here we asked about the impact of NI.
Yeah.
We think you said that you thought it would be essentially zero because we would be made whole by the government from the impact of that. Presumably you're still quite happy that that's the case.
Well, we'll wait to find out next week when we actually have the settlement, but we recognise that the cost of that is significant at 70 million for the group. I mean, I know myself, and I'm sure that's the same for the other CFOs. We're used to managing these kind of situations where we've got cost pressures that we've got to manage within our overall resources. So I'm sure they'll be thinking around it in the same way that others are across the country around when those announcements come, what it means for them and how they manage that.
Okay, that's it from me for now. I think Assembly Member Georgiou.
Sorry, just on the back of your back and forth over national insurance and minimum wage, you sounded a lot more confident you were here that we would be made whole by the government. Now you sound a bit less confident. Is there a reason for that?
No, we haven't got any news at all. We haven't had any news or any indication at all. Remain confident, optimistic as always, but you've got to be realistic as well. So let's see. We'll find out next week.
Okay, thank you.
I've had no more additional information.
Okay, thank you, Faye. Elliot, how confident are you that the functional bodies have followed the Mayor's budget guidance to ensure their expenditures are covered by their projected income and reserve drawdowns?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me today. I'm confident that the functional bodies have followed the guidance. They have all put out figures which are compliant with the control totals we set out in the budget guidance. There are nuances to that, which I'm sure we'll come to, but at a very high level, they've complied with the guidance and lived within the control totals that we set out in that budget guidance. The thing to always say about the consultation budget is how early in the process it comes, because of things discussed regularly in this committee about the statutory timelines that are imposed upon us. The consultation budget and the submissions that inform it up before we have the funding settlements for local government, fire and police, before we have the borough returns at the end of January, and there's lots more work to do between now and the final plenary session in February. So that means there's necessarily lots of uncertainty in what's published in those submissions. But in terms of strict, did they comply with the control totals? Yes.
Thank you. That was a very impressive bit of covering there between the consultation and the final budget. So, welcome. So, how reliant is the GLA on a sizable injection of business rates income, and what will be the consequences if that income is less than expected?
So, the increase in business rates income that we've assumed in this budget is just for a 2% uplift. That was what external forecasts led us to believe would be the uplift when we did the budget guidance in July. Business rates is uprated according to inflation in September of the year before. In July, inflation forecasts for September were 2%. That was the uplift that we applied. That's what you see in the business rates figures in the budget guidance. They are the control totals that the submissions have complied with. September inflation came in, and it was a touch below that. It was 1.7%. So it's a little lower than we'd assumed in the budget guidance. The cost of that reduced inflation is about 5 million, and the figures presented in the consultation budget do not adjust the control totals to apportion out that loss of 5 million income. That will be absorbed within the group. So that's the position on business rates. Your question was about, you seem to imply a big uplift in business rates income had been assumed.
If it helps, my question was about if there was a we're in the projection stage now, but if there was an actual loss of business rate income, how would that impact the overall budgets?
I mean, it would depend entirely on the situation, why the loss occurred and how, what was the magnitude of that loss. We're relatively confident with the business rates revenue in relation to the September inflation figure. That's kind of baked in now, and the government's policy statement issued recently confirmed that would be the approach that was taken. What that means specifically for settlements remains to be seen next week. Sorry, I can see you want to...
No, yeah, and just to follow up on that, because you've clearly addressed the inflationary point, but on the... obviously there's been changes and increases in NI, and that will have an impact on business rate retention. But will that be for this year, or do you think that will show itself in future years?
I would like to answer this one because kind of there was this debate a little bit last time, I remember. So I just wanted to, one of the factors that's you may not be aware or sort of that you might not be aware of is that actually a lot of our business rates are not from small businesses. They're actually a significant portion of our business rates are from large businesses. And that's actually not just true of London as a whole, but even boroughs like your own, as I know very well. A lot of those business rates come from big businesses. So in terms of the impact for the GLA itself, I think we're not anticipating a significant increase, a reduction in business rates as a result of that, in terms of the statistical number element of it. We've in terms of sort of a broader picture as well, I just wanted to let you know that I was talking to our technical guy here who's a member of the London Revenues Group. So I think one of the challenges here that this meeting's said a few times, don't you know kind of what's happening with the revenues and business rates? So I have just sort of like from soft intelligence from that conversation, I've checked in with him in terms of, you know, what's the news on the street in terms of are business rates being collected? Are you seeing a difference across the, you know, are there any themes that are coming across from boroughs around what's happening with business rates? And he's not seen any significant change or reduction. So I just want to let you know we are, you know, pursuing those conversations, which I think has been challenged here before.
No, that is helpful context. I'd just say that, you know, what would be helpful for both of you to provide, because we do, in London, is made up of about 500,000 small businesses. I mean, I'm talking under 25 employees. So therefore, I hear what you say, that it's the big boys and girls that make up most of our business rate retention. But it would be good to have a breakdown, if possible, as to what makes that up. Not now, obviously, but if you could write to the committee, that'd be very helpful.
Yes, it's actually quite interesting information, actually, in terms of what kind of businesses. There's a lot of data in business rates, which is quite interesting information, actually. But also, of course, a lot of the small businesses would be subject to small business rate relief. And different sectors as well are subject to reliefs. And what happens for the GLAs, we receive grants to compensate for those reliefs. So, sorry, the GLA, the councils do. So that's why collecting at some of those really small businesses isn't so much of a risk, because they receive reliefs and we get that money back in grant.
Just in terms of, on this theme of business rates, so one of the themes of the last 7-8 years has been surprise, in inverted commas, unexpectedly large business rates, which comes in, it's averaged about, I don't know, 170, 180 million, something like that every year for the last little while. And the budget process, obviously we have the December budget, the January budget and the February budget, and that obviously comes in between the January budget and the February budget, which does have the helpful impact from the Mayor's point of view of allowing him to allocate lots of money that was previously unallocated. The observation I make is that certainly for the last couple of years, that money has substantially covered the cost of the free school meals, which the Mayor now has as a manifesto commitment. It's not a year by year, maybe he will, maybe he won't. He's committed that he will do it. There wasn't funding in his budget for that. I think perhaps others have been assuming that surprise business rates money will cover it. And if it's not, I don't know what other £140 million source of funds there might be. And if there isn't a surprise, and you know, there's talk that maybe business rates might be unexpectedly lower, is there another source of funding within the GLA that might cover £140 million ish?
I mean, we can't.
I'm not asking you. I don't want to rehash the debate about whether it really is surprising. Anyway, the point is, if it taking at face value the statement that officers make the most accurate estimate they can of what the money will be, and then it turns out to be more. If it doesn't turn out to be more, is there? Presumably there's a problem there, funding that manifesto commitment, which the Mayor seems very confident about. I mean, he's reiterated it. He hasn't just said it in his manifesto and then forgotten it.
Yeah, so of course, although the total cost of free school meals is 140 million, we already have the commitment for the academic year in the draft budget. So it's only 95 million that we're looking to fund for this year. So just wanted to clarify that.
Well, that's sort of true. I mean, I don't want to get into a technical row, but if the Mayor were to announce it for the coming year, he would presumably announce what he's done previously is announce it for the academic year. So the current, the year that is currently being planned, then funds for part of the current. It's because of the overlap of the financial year and the school year. So in actual fact, I think he would be looking to allocate 140 million to fill out the whole coming school year. That's what he's done previously. I
Yeah,
think.
apologies. That's
Yeah.
point taken.
Because otherwise, he would effectively tell schools you can have free school meals up until Easter, and then maybe not between Easter and, and end of school, which I don't think would be in the spirit of his. So that remains a question mark then. If that money doesn't come in,
There's a long way to go
Yeah.
between now and the draft budget on the 15th of January. The commitment is that the draft budget will provide further information about how free school meals will be funded. And that's as much as we can say. for the
Okay.
time being.
And actually, just on the consultation budget, just is there anything that's likely to be sort of financials in the consultation budget that aren't in the sort of separate components, the GLA mayor, the functional bodies, and so on?
I mean, so the functional body figures in the consultation budget precisely match the figures in the functional body submissions. That's the purpose of it. It consolidates those. By virtue of consolidating it, it does include some additional information. So, at the most basic level, it aggregates those up and gives you a total across the group. What it's also able to do by consolidating is to correct or adjust for some potential double counting when you just do that straight aggregation, because there are small elements of group expenditure which are kind of funded via transfer from one body to another. And if you just count the expenditure of each of the bodies, then you double count and so on. So it corrects for that. And the final element of information contained in the consultation budget, not in the body submissions, is group reserves. So there are some reserves which are held separately from the functional bodies, including GLA Mayor, that are held sort of at a group level to allow greater flexibility and sort of redeployment wherever they may be needed across the group. And reflecting back on the earlier conversation about business rates, one of the main and very important group reserve is the business rates reserve. And that's there in recognition of exactly the point we were discussing earlier about the potential volatility in business rates. So the business rates reserve is held at a group level to provide a degree of insurance against that volatility, and has a target threshold of, at the moment, £102 million. So we would not allow it to fall below £102 million, and that's calculated based on a complex thing to do with the nature of business rates funding. At the moment, the business rates reserve is forecast to be at £275 million by the end of 27-28. So that's looking relatively healthy. Obviously, reserves are to be used in very specific circumstances, so not to be thrown away lightly, but that provides some assurance for us.
Understood. Okay. Assembly Member Roberts.
Good morning. It's still sticking with the consultation budget, and it's more about how you're going to use the responses that you get to the consultation budget now that we've got a bit of extra time. Because obviously, when it's a short period of time, you think, oh, well, that's nice. But we don't really have time to look into that. You're now going to have more time to look into the responses you're given. So how are you intending to do that and make sure that the budget reflects the people who've taken the time and trouble to contribute?
I mean, firstly, I'd say thank you for recognising that we've put a relatively significant amount of effort into redesigning the process to allow for that. And I won't list in detail what we've done there, but what that's been able to do is, firstly, extend the period of the consultation, where previously it was kind of 22 days. I think it's now 32 days, so that's extended by 10 days. And it's extended the period between the consultation closing and the draft budget being published. So the consultation closed on 3rd January, draft budget is due for publication on the 15th, so there's nearly 2 weeks there, where previously there was kind of 3 days. So as you've noted, there's a bigger period there for us to consider. And I don't think there's any enormous science in what will happen in that period. We will get the responses. We're receiving them now. We've already had over 500 responses to the Talk London portal, and we'll continue to see what's coming in real time. That nearly 2 week period between closing and draft budget publication provides us the opportunity to discuss that information we receive via the consultation with the Mayor and consider whether it should influence any of the choices that are being made in that draft budget.
Okay, in terms of the 500 you've received so far, how is that measuring up with previous years? Is that
that's quite a lot compared to what we would ordinarily. I think we expect to receive about 600 or 700 responses to the consultation, so we're at 500 already. which is good.
Yep.
It's quite a different, along with all the changes to the budget process, the consultation is handled in quite a different way this year to the past, where previously it was kind of a statement on the website with an email address for people to send into. It's a lot more interactive now, including, targeted questions with drop-down answers to make it easier for people to engage with, and a real-time thread for people to leave comments and to respond to other people's comments. And that thread is publicly available to anyone at any time, so you guys can see it as quickly as we can. So, we put some effort into making that consultation more engaging. We're hopeful that that will help increase the response rate, and we've given ourselves a bit more time at the back end to recognise that consultation response.
And as it's all publicly available now, will we be getting the full suite of responses?
I mean, like I say, you can see the live thread as it is now. We will give you so our Talk London team will do an analysis of that at the end, which we'll share with you as we ordinarily do. We do still, so we actively seek contributions to the consultation from business groups and other sort of significant stakeholders in London. They're shared with us via submissions that are emailed to us. And to the extent that we're able, bearing in mind confidentiality, commercial, GDPR type concerns, we're willing to share those with you as well. But we do need to recognise the confidentiality of the people that sent it to us before we can.
The problem that we have is that we can't be on the portal every 5 minutes looking at the
No,
so that's why we need to have the...
We will absolutely share with you at the end of the process the summary that we received. But I just want to reassure you that you can check it now. You can check it.
And at the risk of hashtag spoilers, any major themes developing which are coming out now?
Too early to say. It's a good read. It makes for a good read.
Can't blame you for trying. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other indications on that. So moving on from the overall sort of context, we now have questions on the GLA Mayor part of the budget. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just come back to free school meals just before I move on? If there was a multi-year settlement, how might that change things in terms of in the future? Would that create a different dynamic?
I mean, what multi-year settlements do, and it's extremely gratifying that the government are thinking about this as part of their integrated settlement, is remove some of the uncertainty about the funding that's available in future years. The multi-year settlement that's being considered at the moment relates primarily to the integrated settlement that Faye was talking about earlier, and that's to do with grants. That is distinct to a certain extent from the business rates framework. And at the moment, it's the business rates framework that provides the funding for free school meals. So, it's brilliant that multi-year settlements are in the offing. That provides us an enormous amount of certainty, which comes with lots of benefits, offsetting across years, reprofiling across years. It provides an income stream against which you can do good treasury management things with as well. But in terms of providing assurance for free school meals specifically, that is not as straightforward as you imagine because of it currently being business rates funded. But none of those decisions are set in stone for years to come. So
there is a potential in the future that free school meals gets covered by the multi-year settlement, which leaves the business rates for something else. I mean,
that's a decision that we're not in conversation with the Mayor about yet.
Okay. Moving on, mandates. Can I ask, what are the challenges about the introduction of mandates and how are these being addressed?
So I've been here, I think, like 10, 11 weeks, and what I feel is I've come into an organisation that's in the process of change at the moment in terms of the sort of mandates and how we're reorientating the organisation around operating our governance processes. I've got to be thinking about the budget in terms of how do we reorder the budget in terms of the sort of mandate processes. So I think for us, sort of in a more operational element of that sort of conversation, that's quite a challenging position to be, because you're kind of reorientating or changing the overall organisation. So that's how I feel in terms of how I've come in. So we've got these kind of mandates, but actually how do we operate in practice for us as officers sorting that thing out? So that's what I'm experiencing or seeing as someone new coming in to the organisation. In terms of the funding of those, those kind of bits have happened a little bit before I've come to this role. But my understanding is there's not been much growth in the GLA's budget in terms of putting those together.
Thank you. I was elected in May, and my experience is I'm in an organisation too that seems changing, but it seems to be changing quite slowly because it's now December and we still don't have these mandates. Do you have any idea when they're going to be published and what level of detail they'll be?
Okay, so in terms of the draft mandates, I think they're, as far as I'm aware, they're near completion date. I haven't got a date for you, but I understand they're near completion of the mandate. The mandate's got a quite high level. It's a more strategic document, but what's worked, so just to assure you, in parallel to the mandates being agreed, we are working on delivery plans to support that, so that you're not kind of doing it in order. We're working on what those delivery plans will look like. The delivery plans include a lot more detail. They include things like key performance indicators, numbers, milestones. So, Ali, I don't know if you might be able to update any more because you're a bit closer to some of those processes perhaps than I am, but all those mandates, those delivery plans will also be coming through Mayor Delivery Board and be reported back through that process, so there'll be some transparency around that.
And just before Elliot goes, are they all coming out at the same time? So do we get a mandate with delivery plans, or is it that we get mandates and then we go through a process where we wait for delivery plans?
So mandates are extremely close to completion, and we're hopeful they'll be with you very soon. They'll come, we hope, as a batch, and will come in advance of the delivery plans. The delivery plans are still being worked up. Delivery mandates are a fixed document that are the Mayor's description to the GLA as an outfit, what he would like us to deliver on his behalf. Delivery plans are a live document, and they will adjust over time, and they describe how the organisation will react to that mandate and make it a reality. Because they're a live document, because they will contain lots of, important but relatively tedious delivery information, it's not determined yet whether they'll be published. What will be published associated with delivery plans is an MD, a mayoral decision. That's important because the mayoral decision for each delivery plan, and remember there's one delivery plan for each mandate, so theoretically there should be an MD attached to each mandate as well, but the MD relates to the delivery plan, and that, crucially, will set out the overall budget that's attached to the delivery of each of those mandates. And that's what the Assembly will see, and we hope that those MDs for each delivery plan start coming through in around
You just say the last bit again, so the bit the Assembly will see is
the MD.
Okay.
So you'll see the mandates.
So the same as now, but there's no... Because the problem is, isn't it, if the Mayor says, we've got this mandate, we've got this big mission, in terms of a plan for it, it's a secret, but you'll see it once it's like, how can we scrutinise that?
The MD will give information that is absolutely necessary for transparency purposes. Critically, the amount of budget attached to each and how that will be deployed. The delivery plan is a live document that is sort of a project management device, and decisions remain on the extent to which that will be shared with the Assembly. So mandates will, very soon. MDs, absolutely, which will set out the budget information, and they hopefully will start coming through in January.
Yeah, I know it's not your decision, but I feel like if we get a mandate without a plan for it, it's a little bit like we might as well just start with a manifesto. Things like swimmable rivers, what does that mean? How are you going to get there? We found out the Environment Committee is a whole set of questions, and it feels without delivery plans, it's quite abstract. Just on, while I'm on environment very briefly, so we've got an environment strategy. The last time we had this conversation about mandates, I was told that essentially mandates do mean, I said, is it about deprioritisation? And they said, well, it's about prioritisation of some things, which essentially means, yes, it's about deprioritisation of other things. How are you making sure that funding, or will funding be protected for some of those smaller projects that aren't necessarily in the mandate but were in the strategies?
So, without wanting to plunge into too much detail, we have the mandates, and there are 14 of them. This is 14 programmes that the Mayor has prioritised. But layered on top of that, we have 5 cross-cutting principles. And environment or climate crisis is one of those cross-cutting principles. And there's a lead on each of those cross-cutting principles whose job it is to ensure that that is a theme that runs through all of the mandates. And we will go through a process internally to ensure that each of those cross-cutting principles has the necessary visibility across the mandates that is needed to deliver those objectives.
I quite like detail, so don't worry about too much detail. The climate crisis, I'm pleased to hear that that is a principle, and I would argue that that principle runs through everything anyway. Like, if we have a climate crisis, then no matter whether you're talking health, policing, housing, you need to think about your climate goals. But if we talk about something like waste, for instance, which I could easily connect with the climate crisis, but wouldn't necessarily be connected unless there's something explicit about protecting money for waste, and there was just a confirmation hearing for Re London. How would you ensure that things like food growing projects are made sure, because that was in the environment strategy, are still protected?
I mean, I don't think I can speak specifically at that project level. I don't know if you can.
I don't know a lot about that. We'd have to come.
Can we write back on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this indicates why we do need delivery plans, because otherwise these things will just get lost because they're not the big mandates. And I get the mayor wants to be big, bold and do this visionary stuff, but actually these little projects really matter, and he is a mayor for all Londoners.
So I'm sure within those delivery plans, the contribution that some of these smaller projects will be considered, should be considered as part of that. It's not just about big numbers, it's also about the value of those things as well. I mean, without knowing the detail, that's what I would hope has happened.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
So that was really useful information about mandates, and at least we're not into the realms of, milestones and all the rest of it. Well, you say yet. I'm confident that we won't get there. Milestones and delivery plans and moderate decisions, that feels like enough to be going on with.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt. Faye, it's really cold. Is there any way we can do something about the...
I'm put it on a bit.
Yeah,
it's warmish.
we've done that, yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want another one of those?
No, it's okay. My own personal radiator might help.
Is there not a little heater down there?
There is one, but it's
not.
Thank you for noticing, though.
Can I also say that this is I think they're doing something with, well, they're obviously doing something with the roof. I don't think the microphones are picking it up. Obviously, December is the perfect time to have people on the roof hammering. Yesterday, they were mostly drilling, and we ignored it. I don't want to adjourn just for some hammering, so let's just press on as best we can. Can we get a second heater? Are we able to deploy? Okay, a second heater is possibly being procured as we speak, so stand by. Just while we're on the GLA mayor bit, we did spend a lot of time yesterday, well, in fact, we spent our entire meeting yesterday looking at housing. I don't want to go over all of that in detail, but just one bit about GLA Land and Property, which sort of been a bit of a forgotten, red-headed stepchild of the mayor's housing plans. In terms of their delivery, how do you keep tabs? I'm not sure whether it's you, Faye, or you, Elliot. How do you keep tabs on whether they're actually delivering? Because it's very easy to have a narrative about, there are all of these problems, but there's always a problem with everything. But we still try and get something done, nevertheless. And my feeling on GLAP is it does seem to have, perhaps unfairly, my perception is that it seems to have lagged a bit. I don't know if that's your perception. And in any case, how do you make sure that it actually is pressing on and turning these, essentially surface car parks into something more useful and valuable?
So this actually has been more of a priority area for me since I've been in role. So I've spent some time learning about GLAP and what they're doing, getting involved in the numbers. So I've focused, actually, I must admit, a little bit more on the financial element of it rather than the performance. But they are connected, because obviously you've got to be able to house the performance. And what I would say is instead of me keeping tabs on what's going on, I'm part of those steering group, for example. I've certainly, short time I've been here, spent a lot of focused time thinking about GLAP and what that might mean. The other thing that I've done in order to get some assurance around, making sure that finance contributes to that delivery plan is making sure they have more robust financial support. So we've got financial support in place at the moment, but it's kind of part of a post of the team as opposed to their own dedicated finance support. And so before I came here, there was work in progress to sort that out, but it hadn't sort of stalled a bit. And so we have actually got someone starting in January to provide that additional support to empower and ask those decisions around linking the finance element to the delivery. What I must say, though, from my limited opportunity to spend, or I have, like I said, it's one of the areas I spent more time with, and I do feel assured that they're really thinking about how to deliver, but keeping an eye on the commercial element and the risk element of what's happening in GLAP for the different phases and projects I've been involved in. So from my experiences in my previous authority, I've got a little bit of understanding about how these kind of projects work, and I feel that there's certainly a culture of openness and understanding about the importance of balancing that deal being commercial and still delivering. So although I've not able to talk about delivery performance, I'm getting a level of assurance from my immediate engagement with that team area.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I have a quick update. So, firstly, I've been told that the hammering has been asked if it can pause. And secondly, we're getting the heating turned up, so we're getting at least something achieved this morning. Assemblymember Polanski.
Thanks for letting me go again. I'm nothing if not obsessive. I just want to go back to so currently with the environment strategy, we do have an implementation plan. It ran out, but it was fully published and fully public. So if they're being replaced with delivery plans that won't be public, that feels like a real regression.
So what will still be public is quarterly performance reporting. There's a requirement in the Mayor's budget guidance for each functional body, including GLA Mayor, to report quarterly on performance and financial information. Once this new governance refresh has concluded, GLA will revert to performance reporting on a quarterly basis. That will be informed by the contents of delivery plans, notwithstanding what decisions taken on publication or not of those.
But as I understand, none of that is new. So what we're losing is the implementation plan. We're effectively getting the same level of transparency we got before, but we're losing a big chunk of it, which is the implementation plan.
So, with apologies, I think that this might be a conversation to have with those that lead on the governance arrangements more directly. But we're happy to write back if you want to.
Yeah, you said you'd write back. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I'll stop now.
Okay.
Like the hammering.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of hammering to be done at the other end of the building. I think that's it for GLA Mayor, so we're moving on to our next section, which is on TfL. So, Faye, if I can kick off. Obviously, one of the big claims, or big claims makes it sound like an implied criticism. One of the big statements being made by TfL, they're very pleased about their financial sustainability, by which they mean they're effectively in a surplus, albeit quite small difference between two very large numbers. What do what's your assessment of that, and what do you think are the key risks to their surplus for the 25-26 year?
So obviously, when I sort of applied for this role, I could see the history with with COVID and what happened to TfL's fares, and you can certainly see that they've in a much better position and they've been able to recover. They're not fully been able to recover better from that position. So as the TfL CFO, they have a responsibility to making sure they've got appropriate level of reserves, and I can see, observing their papers, that they're expecting a £250 million reserve. But also, they do have a £100 million contingency, so core budget, £100 million contingency. And talking to their CFO there, he was explaining that, in terms of order, you would start first, if there were financial risks, it would be around using that £100 million first of all in terms of contingency, and then beyond that, they've got that £250 million reserve. So they've got a reasonable level of buffer. But of course, they are a different type of business to some of the other businesses in the group. So unlike some of the other sort of organisations, they have half of their funding comes from fares. So I think they recognise that they're in a more financially different position than some of the other elements of the group budget. And so although £250 million is good, it's a good, good figure, actually the ambition would be to have that as a higher level of reserve. So I think that they're working towards that as a process. But as for next year, there's a good level of financial resilience, and they have options to address that if there are some of those risks that end up being materialised.
Okay. I mean, my observation is just that surplus that they declare or they expect is the difference between two very large numbers, and so in effect a very small percentage change either in their costs or in their revenue either significantly increases, or perhaps more likely the way the world usually works, significantly reduces or eliminates that surplus. So presumably that's your assessment as well of that.
Yes,
it sounds like a large number, a couple of £100 million, but it's actually small in the context of tens of billions.
Yes, exactly, and that's why it's important that they go that reserve. In actual fact, we were having a conversation yesterday about the fact that perhaps in a more other sectors organisation, you would have a reserve level that reflects your net budget position, but in TfL they want a reserve level that reflects their gross budget position, because actually the fares income is such a big element of that you were talking about. Do you want to say something?
Okay.
But that was the point I was going to make, is
Yeah.
that their target reserve of £500 million in the general fund is higher than you would expect in other organisations, in part reflecting that. And, you know, based on the calculation Faye says. And, I mean, on your point, you know, small difference between two very big numbers could easily swing. Arithmetically, absolutely correct. But it's also important to recognise the general trend over time, which has been, you know, a movement in the right direction towards an operating surplus, and pretty consistently moving in that direction since the devastating impact of the COVID lockdowns.
Okay. There was a £350 million borrowing facility made available or announced by the Mayor in September 2022, and earlier this year reduced. Do you know if that's still available to TfL, and how much, if any, of it has been either used or is sort of earmarked and expected to be used?
I think it's not been drawn. Yes, that would be great, Elliot. Thank you.
Yes, it's still available, and no, it hasn't been used.
So it's, what is it? 220 that's available, or
300.
smaller amount?
300.
Sorry, I've just said 350. Yes. So it's from 350 to 300, but the 300 is still available.
300. Yeah, it reduced from 350 to 300. 300 is still available. It has not been called upon.
Okay. And in terms of sort of returning to this question of financial sustainability for TfL, other than some fairly obvious things around fares, obviously it's a mayoral decision what the well, maybe it is or maybe it isn't. We'll come on to that in a moment, about what fares may or may not be. But obviously, other than that fairly obvious fares decision, are there any other things that are in your mind that are sort of levers that TfL could pull to affect their financial position? I mean, it may be just a reassuring conversation about things they're already doing, or are there things that you think they aren't doing but could be?
I don't, from my sort of conversations I've had, I can't think of anything it's not my business, so I couldn't think of anything that they weren't already doing. But I do think it's useful to think about the impact of things like multi-year settlement would have on that business, particularly a multi-year capital settlement, so they can make long-term decisions. I know that's sort of, so, you know, being able to articulate clearly what the impact of that is. And that, obviously, as we know, that doesn't just help London, but it helps the country, because many of those jobs for building those trains are, you know, in different parts of the country. So I think that, for me, of everything. And then just generally, you know, sort of growth, you know, generally, you know, being able to, would mean that passenger numbers would be able to go up, you know, more homes, more things happening in London, getting people coming into London. So that whole growth agenda and what how the GLA can contribute to that more widely will help TfL's financial sustainability.
Okay, that's useful. Thanks. Assembly Member Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. Faye, a key driver of TfL's financial sustainability is its planned savings programme. TfL planned to make savings totalling £236 million in 25-26. This includes reducing bad debt costs by £124 million. How comfortable are you that TfL can deliver this reversal of the current trend that has seen bad debt cost increase from £90 million to over £500 million in 4 years?
Certainly, you can imagine why you asked the question, because it is a large figure, isn't it? Difference. I mean, what you do when you look at your bad debt provision, you would look at, for example, you know, your recovery rates. You'd look at what you were doing to increase or support those recovery rates. You'd be wanting to understand how many bills you were raising in the first place, actually, to drive that income up. And so I'm confident in getting to that figure that at TfL, the CFO would have had that calculation, had that confidence around that. Understand from talking to them that they've got this big program in order to increase that. So those incomes mainly come from PCN notices. So they have a tripling of their enforcement agencies, which is one of the reasons why they're confident around getting those figures. They've also reported in the pack doing some nudge theory, which I've seen myself having significant impact, actually. Some of the tweaks just in how you communicate with people can make a significant increase in your recovery rates. So, but of course, with all savings, they'll be monitoring, keeping a tight rein on what's the deliverability against that, and monitoring that process. I think from that point of view, I think they're doing everything they can to make sure they're confident around that figure. But of course, anything we'll keep a watching brief, as I'm sure they will do on that.
Thanks. Well, I admire your optimism if you think TfL can save money. How much of the current bad debt outlined before is unpaid ULEZ fines?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information.
Okay. Could you get that information?
Yeah.
Right. Are you confident? You've already alluded to the fact that TfL feels like they've got this sledgehammer to crack a walnut of these unpaid PCNs. How confident are you that how much they'll be able to recover? Or have you got any case studies of where significant amount of bad debt provision has been built up and local authorities or even combined authorities have been managed to claw back a significant amount?
Unfortunately, I don't have that particular detail of TfL. I think they're coming here, aren't they? So we can let them know that there's some of the questions that you might be asking them. I do know that a small tweak in behaviours or can result in changes. But obviously, if you mentioned in terms of the fact that they'll have historic debt that they'll need to be collecting, and with the levels of write-off, etc., I think you'll probably want to be understanding in terms of when you speak to TfL directly.
Okay. Well, in that case, I didn't want to have to wait for them. But if we're looking at the 500 million then over the last 4 years, and this is more of an abstract question, so hopefully either of you will be able to answer, what are the consequences if a higher than expected amount has to be written off?
So it will depend on the debt provision that they've put in their book. So what happens to the debt provision is there's a provision in your balance sheet, and therefore if they've got sufficient in their balance sheet, and I don't have those figures to hand, to cover that debt, then there'll be no impact on the revenue budget. But if that debt they're writing off is higher than that, then there'll be a direct revenue cost on their budget of doing that.
Yeah, I think if it helps, having looked at their bad debt provision over recent years, I don't think and there's something for you guys to look at, I think it's truly underestimated their assumptions when it came to expanding the ULEZ zone. I'm not, the decision's been made, and we've had a mayoral election since then. But the point I'm trying to make is that they base a lot of spending assumptions on those ULEZ fines. And obviously, over the last 4 years, we've seen bad debt provision go from 90 to 500 million. I think it's just something that really needs to be looked into, because I think their spending assumptions have been proven incorrect. But that's it from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. Just on that, I think it is. I think we've established that it does seem to be. You mentioned PCNs. I think it's almost not exclusively. That's putting it too strongly. But the lion's share of that extra money that's ballooned in terms of bad debt is from ULEZ, ULEZ charges turning into ULEZ PCNs. I don't know whether you at GLA sort of group level take a view on how TfL, because obviously it's a material sum. I mean, it's hundreds of millions of pounds, and they're talking about a sum that's similar to that being their surplus or not surplus. So if they're wrong about how recoverable that is, and my observation would be this is money you're trying to recover from people who are driving around in old cars that don't comply with ULEZ. So do they have hundreds of millions of pounds? Maybe not. So I don't know at what point you would take a view on effectively a sort of oversight in terms of whether TfL you think are being realistic in their assumptions about recoverability.
Yeah. So what I would do you want
I mean, of course, we monitor the risks of all the functional bodies.
Yeah.
This specific issue isn't what we're currently monitoring as the biggest risk associated with TfL. That is fares and fares revenue. And so that's where our attention is focused. I mean, you're right to point out that it's PCNs, and to a large extent, one of the features of this debt being ULEZ related is that there was already an assumption built into TfL's medium-term plan that income from ULEZ charges would reduce over time, because the behavioural intention of that policy was to incentivise people to opt out of the charges, the cars that generate the charges, and so on. So you would hope that it's not to be ignored. It's a material sum. We're relatively confident that TfL, as a well-managed organisation from a financial perspective, are on top of it. It's hopefully a temporary problem because of the nature of that ULEZ income decreasing over time. And from our perspective, fares is the bigger risk to monitor. I mean, Faye, I don't know if you don't agree with that, but yeah.
I mean, I think you're unambiguously correct that, you know, a number that runs into the billions is clearly more important than a number that's in the hundreds of millions. I mean, that's clearly true. I suppose the thing that does concern me as well. So you're right that their projection was that it would tail away effectively to nothing over a period of, I don't know, 2-3 years, something like that. It would become negligible, and the OPEX of running the system would outweigh the expected income. But what TfL always tell us, which I think they think reassures us, but actually makes me worry more, is that it's really a small minority of people that are generating these PCNs. And again, that just makes it to me even less likely that you'd be able to recover all of that money from them, and perhaps more likely that persistent, assuming it's a sort of persistent hardcore group of people, that they maybe continue rather than it being a sort of statistically large population of people that's gradually declining. So that, I think those are the two reasons why it flags a red flag for me. One is that it's a very small number of people, therefore maybe unrecoverable, and secondly that it might not tail off because it might be, you know, a few hundred people who are running up this huge. Anyway, I think we've made the point that. Sorry, yeah. Did you want to come on this? I had. Yep. Okay. In that case, Assemblymember Harani, and then Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you. I'll be very quick, to be honest, because I think it'd be useful for us, and maybe this one for when TfL are here, to get a breakdown of where this bad debt lies, because obviously there's fare dodgers, there's congestion charge, there's lots of different reasons why people might be receiving fines through the letterbox. I think a breakdown of that for this committee would be quite helpful.
I think that's right. I think perhaps we could write to them ahead of that meeting and just say this is a thing that we're likely to ask about. If they could do a bit of digging beforehand, it would save us then having to ask for them to write to us afterwards. I know within ULEZ we've asked them before, and they don't create a breakdown of which parts of the ULEZ zone it is. I think we have asked them before, but if they've got a breakdown, as you say, of fare evasion and other forms of PCN, obviously some of them are parking as well. We will make a note of that, and we'll ask them ahead of the meeting, so they hopefully will have the figures. In that case, we go to Assemblymember Polanski.
Thank you. In TfL's fare income submission, it assumes a 4.6% increase for government-regulated fares and 3.6% for TfL fares. What's the split of passenger income between government-regulated and TfL fares?
That one I'm going to have to pass earlier.
It's 20/80.
Cool.
20 for government-regulated, 80 mayoral.
Like a straight answer. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Excellent. And obviously there's been a lot of speculation around that, but presumably your answer to any speculation around it would be it's a decision for the Mayor. We'll wait till January when we expect him to make that decision.
Correct.
Yep. Well, we're rattling along here, aren't we? Assemblymember Georgiou.
Thank you, Chair. If the government expects a 4.6% TfL fares increase, what consequences would you expect in terms of reductions in future government funding?
I'm just trying. We're pausing a bit, so I'm just thinking. Say that. Can you ask that again, so I can just process?
So I'll repeat the question, perhaps with a rider on it at the end. Yeah. If the government expects a 4.6% TfL fares increase, what consequences would you expect in terms of reductions in future government funding? Essentially, what I'm trying to get at is the more TfL becomes self-sufficient, it's a big ask, but if it does, how will your engagement with government change in terms of, the assumption is they will be less likely to provide more support in terms of revenue. The capital stuff probably won't change, but that's the gist of it, really.
Okay. I think that the investment, well, this is obviously, I'm still finding my feet tricky kind of question, but what I'm thinking is that the investment in TfL, ongoing investment in TfL from the government, is really important nationally, not just for TfL itself in terms of stock, but also expansion of their network to support growth in London overall in terms of housing, economic growth, etc. And also the fact that much of the money that's spent on those trains is spent in different parts of the country. It's not actually spent in London. So they're expensive, and they can always, more and more can be done. I do know from that TfL have got an ambition to be able to fund more investment themselves, absolutely, but that's not at the assumption that there'll be less money from government. It's that they'll be able to do more overall.
Yeah, Faye, I appreciate that you're sort of towing the line and telling us how wonderful TfL is. The point I was trying to make is that, as usual with local government, and we saw it, with the sort of the pre-2010 government, there was a gradual weaning off of support for local bodies that were able to stand on their own 2 feet. So I think that's the theme of my question is, you don't have to say yes or no, but may you anticipate a reduction in support for TfL if fares go up, continue to go up, and they become more sustainable?
That's certainly not in my thinking. My thinking is actually we need more growth for London, more trains, more housing, more growth. So actually, if that opportunity presented itself, we would be lobbying for continued funding from the grant and from the government, and to be able to do more in our rolling stock, making it a better service so that we get more passenger numbers, and then it's kind of self-fulfilling as well from that point of view.
Okay, Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks. Before I go on to my question I'm due to ask, just to clarify on that last question, TfL don't currently receive any revenue funding from government, do they? So the fares, any fare settlement is unrelated to any reduction, because currently it would be a reduction from nil. Is that correct? Yeah, but you made a you made a distinction between capital and revenue, didn't you? So yes, just to be clear. Yeah, you made a distinction between capital and revenue, and TfL gets no revenue support. Just to clarify that. For
you're technically correct. They don't get revenue support. But what did happen several years ago is that was previously TfL revenue funding was rolled into the business rates regime, which we now passport straight through to TfL in any case. So there is a big chunk, over 2 billion, of funding that comes from business rates. But
we've already discussed that we're not expecting any change to that.
That's true.
That arrangement.
We're not expecting that to be operated beyond the standard 1.7.
No, that's fine. Just to clarify those categories. My question was actually going to be on renewals, because through long periods of underfunding of network, we are seeing the impact of lack of spending on renewals. Not the big capital projects, but the sort of smaller, making sure the network is continuing to run. So Faye, what's your assessment of the ability to balance TfL's acknowledged need to increase the amount of spending on renewals with the financial pressures that are being caused by lower than expected fares income?
I think I'd imagine for the CFOs at TfL, it's quite a tricky balance that they make in terms of being able to work out that balance between those two elements. What I think is really important, so often in a sort of financially challenging situation, what CFOs tend to think is, we're going to stop maintenance, and actually we're just going to pull back there, and that's where we're going to reduce that's what we reduce. But in this type of business, actually that's a difficult, but it's not a great decision, because actually eventually what will happen is that will come to result in lower fares. And so I don't quite know how TfL do that balancing act. I suspect from a long time of years of experience of working out, where that where that balance is about what things need to invest in that create that good, keep driving up their revenue income. So I guess from my perspective, I'm not close to the detail of that, but I'm confident that around the need and the ongoing need to make sure we're still investing in that basic, making sure that services run, because it's directly linked to passenger numbers, passenger confidence in using those services.
So am I getting, and I appreciate that obviously TfL are the expert in this sort of business and the TfL finance expert in this sort of business, but does that mean effectively that the balance that they're deciding on doesn't really have any sort of oversight from your area of the business, because it's sort of like, it's so complex, we'll let TfL do it, which is a little bit concerning, because much as I think TfL is a fantastic organisation, they don't always get everything right. So is your answer basically they're going to get on with that and cross fingers from our point of view?
Yes, I'm quite new in role. I've only been here for
I do understand
10 weeks,
that.
so
I'm
not sure if there's any processes that I've missed that I'm not aware of, etc., in terms of those kind of things that you might be able to help me with.
Yeah, I mean, there's a transport team in the GLA whose entire purpose is to keep track of what TfL are up to, and they do scrutinise this stuff in quite some detail. So
Are there any
I wouldn't
views
wanna
on
give you
this
the-
balance then? Because it's probably one of the it is one of the biggest problems we're facing in terms of TfL, is that things will start to stop working if the right amount of money is not spent on renewals. So is there any, I appreciate you may not be able to tell us now, but is there any view from the GLA group about that balance at the moment?
With apologies, I think this is another one that we'd have to write back to you on, but I can reassure you that the GLA does oversee how TfL invest their capital funding and the balance across maintenance and other issues. So, but for more detail, we can talk to the people responsible for that and write back.
If possible, Chair, I'd like to see that. Yeah.
I think definitely. In fact, when TfL's budget submission came out, they had a table in there showing the capital renewals that were required. I mean, there were entire tube lines of rolling stock, Bakerloo line being perhaps one of the most famous examples, that's just, well past its, its life expired effectively, and then you add on, trams and central line, line after line. You look at it and you realise that over the next, let's say, 10 years, 15 years, it's an immense capital renewal programme, effectively to keep the service that we already have running. That's not it's an improvement relative to what would happen if we didn't do it, in the sense that the service would start to deteriorate rapidly, as Senator Baker's saying. But actually, from a Londoner's point of view, it would look like an enormous amount of money spent to make no difference. Maybe you're on a shinier train with an exciting new moquette, which you can also buy in a tie and sock combo. But it would not actually deliver a more frequent service. It would just not deteriorate. And that seems to me to be a kind of almost eye-wateringly large number. So that presumably that's the sort of thing that team keeps tabs on. And as I say, the worry that I have is that if you look over a long period of time, the next 5, 10, 15 years, it's an enormous amount of money that needs to be spent.
It certainly is. The figures that I've seen, which I think you'll need to ask TfL about when you see them, are that the annual maintenance cost isn't far off the sums that were given in the budget on an annual basis. So they got 485, and that isn't miles away from what they need for their maintenance figure on an annual basis. Obviously, the big thing that's lacking, which Fair's already alluded to, is the multi-year certainty, especially on things like capital investment. And the important milestone coming up there is the spending review in spring next year. And so, there will be lots of conversations between now and then about all of that. But the GLA are cognizant of the need for TfL to invest in capital maintenance. And I would encourage you to ask TfL about that.
And I think the final question on, just before we move on to the next section, obviously we've spoken about the importance of fares revenue to TfL. It's a huge chunk of their income, and this capital renewals backlog problem. Do your team provide advice to the Mayor when he's making his fare setting decision? Obviously he's made a political decision that he wants to keep fares low, but the financial impact of that is less fares revenue, which we've just heard is a big risk to TfL and a big problem in terms of renewals. It's his decision to make, but do you provide him with advice on what the implications of that are likely to be?
So just to let you know, as part of that decision process, I've assured myself that he's had that appropriate information from TfL colleagues in what are the implications of those various scenarios and what that might mean. So absolutely, actually, it's actually a thing that I've been assured myself of this week that's happened. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I say it's his decision, I guess, as long as it's an informed decision. I don't see any other indications on transport, so that takes us on to our next section, which is MOPAC and MPS. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you very much, Elliot. I know you've seen some of these questions. Staff costs at 3.7 billion make up over 75% of gross revenue expenditure in the draft MOPAC budget for 25-26. However, the budget does not include the underlying assumptions, such as the number of police officers. Do you not think it should do? Because it means nothing.
I take your point. I absolutely take your point. There's an enormous amount of uncertainty in the MOPAC submission, not least because of the ordinary situation that the police settlement isn't released until after we publish the submissions and the consultation budget. But this year is a particularly uncertain year for police funding. And I think the judgment by MOPAC when they published their submission was that it would be spuriously accurate to give officer numbers because there's so many contingencies and trade-offs yet to be decided upon that it wouldn't be useful information. And so it wasn't presented in the budget submission. So I'm not ignoring what you say. I agree that, you know, officer salaries are a significant and the majority part of revenue spending by MOPAC, but there's just an enormous amount of uncertainty. There was at the end of November when the submissions were published. Now, obviously, two things to add are that what we do know is the MOPAC forecast for officer numbers at year end, which is published, and that's 32,752. And we also know the Commissioner's statement at the London Policing Board yesterday, which, again, you'll have to ask MOPAT for more detail about that. But, you know, the Commissioner's come out and made statements about what the budget constraints that he faces at the moment means for his potential officer numbers in the years going forward.
Well, and he's really set hairs running here. I mean, I was so concerned when I heard what unfortunately, he doesn't come to the policing board, as in our
PCC.
Proper PCC board. Otherwise, we could ask him. But to actually say that he might have to cut 2,300 officer posts and stop things like flying squads and all sorts of different forensics, etc. I mean, for those of us that really care passionately about policing in London, this is terrifying. And the budget that we're looking at now doesn't specify how many officers at all, which is just, it renders it more or less useless because you may well have a balanced budget here, and that's what you aim for, but it doesn't tell those of us that really care about this, and I suspect Londoners really do, what the underlying numbers are. What does this mean? What does this budget actually mean to Londoners? It's no good just putting money figures all around and making sure that they balance. What story is this telling us? And actually, this budget isn't telling us much at all, is it?
I mean, I think the story the submission's telling you is there's an enormous amount of uncertainty at the moment until the police settlement is published for MOPAT funding. And B, the story you already knew, that the police have enormous financial pressures which were built up over the course of, you know, a period of time and due to factors often discussed in this committee. And that, you know, that has come to a bit of a head this year. So the budget gap that was published in the 24-25 budget for MOPAC was £300 million in the next financial year. Over the course of this year, the work that MOPAC and the MPS have done has seen that budget gap increase to £450 million. Now that's a very material sum in the context of an overall budget of about £4 or £5 billion. And that's the context for the submission that was published at the end of November. You know, and an enormous amount of work has gone on in MOPAC and the Met to work out how to rise to that challenge, but it was the judgment of MOPAC at the time the submission was published. The challenges were so significant and the funding situation so uncertain that presenting, you know, specific numbers would have been would have reflected an unrealistic level of certainty about what was going to happen because too much was yet to be decided.
The trouble is, the Commissioner needs certainty, doesn't he? He's trying to run a business, if you like. And how on earth can you run a business when you might have such a massive shortfall, when you've got staff that you can't just take on and get rid of? And we know that because the previous government gave him so much money to employ more staff, and they couldn't do it. So you can't just get rid of staff and bring them back in again. So you're telling me then that all through last year, the uncertainty around the funding for MOPAC was absolutely there and everybody knew about it?
The budget gap was there. It was published in last year's budget, 300 million. When digging into that, it increased. So, you know, it's on public record that budget gap is currently 450 million.
It is indeed, because you see, that leaves me wondering then why the Mayor promised in his manifesto to work with a Labour government and get an extra 1,300 neighbourhood police officers. I'm wondering, as I'm sure other people would be, how on earth he's promising that, when clearly the problems around finance around them at the MPS are great.
There's still a spending review to come next year. So there's I keep on, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, but there's a lot of work to be done between now and the spending review next year, and it would be too early to presume what that spending review will say in relation to commitments the government have made about policing, I think.
You see, the Budget Committee on Policing last year, I wasn't on it last year because I was busy doing other things, but I've obviously watched it back because the policing side of it has always been so important to me. And I'll be honest with you, it was a complete and utter mess, that meeting. There were 2 budgets submitted. Nobody could answer questions. It was all over the place. We cannot have this for the Metropolitan Police. They're just too important. What's the assumption of the average cost of a police officer at the moment?
I think that's a question for the Met, with apologies, Chair. It's a complicated calculation. So to do that calculation, you need to understand the grade makeup across the entire police workforce so that you can, adjust the average to reflect the difference in the LTs of grade. You have to take into account the fixed costs associated with a member of staff, so the accommodation cost, the kit cost, the tech cost. It's complicated. So
yes, no, I know it is, and I know that there was a figure they worked on a few years ago. I think it was 50-something.
Several years ago, it was near 60,000. Yeah. That is almost certainly incorrect now, but it's definitely a question for the Met.
So somebody must have that answer.
With apologies, that's a question for the Met.
Okay, yeah.
We can certainly put that to them 7th of January.
Yes, well, I'm hoping that the Commissioner will come on that date, and I think we should make sure that we invite him.
We will certainly, in fact, I believe we have already invited him.
I'm sure he'll want to be answering some of these questions, because his organisation is in a mess because it's not financed properly, and it needs to be financed properly. I mean, Elliot, what do you see as the most significant financial risk to MOPAC or the MPS? On their 25, 26
I mean,
plans?
It is what we've just been discussing, isn't it? So it's the funding uncertainty, the gap that was present before the submission was published, which has been closed because of the savings that they've set out, but nonetheless those savings are challenging, presents a big risk and a big challenge for the Met. So if we think about the things that are driving those risks, as discussed often at this committee, the Met have historically been underfunded for their responsibilities as a national city. So the NIC grant is currently estimated to be 240 million short in real terms compared to when it was calculated in 2015-16. That's a big number. That's not far off the gap that they've closed through savings. The Met don't receive a capital grant. They have a big capital budget of between 300 and 400 million pounds a year, which has revenue consequences, so that presents challenges, and they all contribute to the main risk, which is, this big gap that was published last year and has grown since.
And it's a significant risk, isn't it? Yes, so is the answer. It really is a significant risk.
I mean, it is a risk. It is not a risk that is being ignored. So it is being tackled, and you will no doubt talk in a lot of detail with the Met and MOPAC about it on the 7th. The tricky thing with the Met is that, because their budget is so heavily dependent on staff costs, if you ask me as a finance professional, is it possible to close that gap? Arithmetically, yes, because it's staff numbers. Attrition will close that gap for you if you want to do so, but the operational consequences of that are the risk, and that's the conversation that is needed with the Met rather than anything that I can shed light on, I'm afraid.
Okay, so do you recognise the £450 million budget shortfall that they're talking about?
I mean, that's the figure that's been reported to us in the information we've received.
That's one hell of a figure, isn't it? I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you, but I don't think their budget is that big on when I've looked at it before, is the balance between MOPAC and the MPS budgets. Is there a case of, reducing MOPAC, the business, if you like, and giving more money to the Met? Because clearly they have got to find more money for the Metropolitan Police. The Mayor has constantly said if we had a Labour government, all will be well with the world. And I'm just wondering what conversations may have gone on there for this 450 million. I tried to get the NIC money from various Home Secretaries because I think that is really wrong and we need that money. But, I mean, this has got to be funded properly. Well, we're in agreement on that part. Okay, I'm not happy with the budget because clearly, without the numbers in there, it's just a whole load of figures that are balancing. Doesn't tell us the story at all, and that's no good for us. It's no good for Londoners. I'll leave that there and go on to my next favourite subject, the police. Shall I? Unless
just before you do move on, just been discussing with the team. So we have written to the Commissioner to attend our meeting on the 7th of January. Other people from the MPS have confirmed, not him. With the agreement of the committee, we can write to him again today, particularly in the light of the statements he's made this week, that he may wish to attend himself or send someone, I hesitate to say more senior than the person he's confirmed so far, but more senior than the person he's confirmed so far, in the light of this discussion and the light of the comments that he made on Tuesday, in fact, rather than yesterday. But so unless anybody objects, I will write to him today to reiterate that the 7th of January meeting is happening and that we would be very delighted to hear what he has to say.
Absolutely.
Okay, I see some nodding. Good. Decision made. In that case, do I have any other... Did anyone else want to ask any questions on MOPAC or the MPS? I don't see any indications.
No.
Okay, in that case...
If we could have... Sorry, Chairman, if we could have in writing what their estimate, if you can find that out, what their estimated figure on the cost per...
We can certainly pursue that with you.
Because I know you know their team, so it would be useful because we can at least do some calculations in our own way of finding out what that actually means of the amount of officers. Thank you.
Apologies. Sorry, that was the question on... Sorry, because I wasn't... Not saying that I wasn't listening, but I was discussing what we might do about the letter.
Do you not hang on my every word, Neil?
I was preparing...
The average cost of an officer is...
I was preparing a plan to write a letter.
It's all right. I'll sort it out with Gino.
Was this the question about the cost per person plus the total number of people and the total cost of both of those
it's just
going up?
what figure are they all working on? Is the average figure of a cost of a police officer? And I know it's average and I know it's approximate, but we always used to work on that. When we used to work out in our budget amendments how much it would cost us to put extra money in for police, we used to have a figure that we used to work on. So
in fact, then, I hesitate to delve into more technicalities, but then what we might be asking for is the cost of a new officer rather than the average cost of an officer, including all, from the commissioner.
No, because they're all different rankings.
That's what I mean. If you recruit a new officer, they're not going to be a deputy commissioner, they're going to be a PC.
No, but there is an average cost that takes all of that into account.
Okay.
There used to be.
There is, I know.
we can certainly do that. Okay,
Done
right.
a lot of work on these things. Right, now we're on to the fire brigade.
Fire brigade, take it away.
So, thank you. Faye, are you concerned by the London Fire Brigade's plan to use its reserves and the level of savings required to balance its budget in 24-25 and to reduce the budget gap in 25-26?
So I certainly think that they are in a challenging financial position. Like most public sector organisations, they're keen to make sure that their front line, as no doubt you are, is protected. I'm not overly concerned about that, but I do recognise that they've got significant challenges in terms of their budget gap. The savings are 18 million, isn't it? I think 18 million that they're expecting to be able to meet. In terms of their overall financial sort of resilience, they've got reserves of equating to about 3.5% of their overall budget, which is what the CFO is determined to be like a reasonable level. They're a different type of business again from TfL because once again there's like staff based, so the risk is slightly lower than it would be in TfL, but I'm sure that though the CFO would like that to be a higher figure than 3.5% long term, but obviously the financial challenges that have been in place for the public sector meant that they've invested significantly in particularly fire reform, I think, is where a lot of their budget, where a lot of their reserves have been allocated to, so that's one of the challenges. What I've also noticed is they don't have significant level of earmarked reserves, which sometimes you can, be flexible around, so I do think that they are in a challenging financial position. But what I must say is that from all the meetings I've attended so far, and I've been in several meetings where they've been talking about their budget process actually, that they really seem to have a grip and understand what they need to do to balance their budget. They've got a programme that they're running. They've done in order to understand how they can make efficiencies. They've got a clear sight on that. So I
Yes,
feel
they
like
do.
I feel really assured actually by that they're determined to get to a balanced budget position.
Yes, and they're very transparent. They always have
Yes.
been. So
Yeah.
that there's a comfort there,
There's just
whereas there isn't the
cultural
comfort with
assurance,
the
isn't there?
MOPAC.
Yeah.
So the question here is, what are the options for funding the LFB budget gap in future years? I mean, do you want to share with us just one or two of the suggestions they have? I know they've got their finance director's very open with what he wants to do.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't been part of that detail. Have you been part of that detail? I've been to sort of when we've had more generic conversations, but I don't think I've heard some of the specifics around that.
Okay, well, we'll pick it up with them next year.
Yeah,
Don't
apologies,
worry,
yeah.
I'm far less worried about that. I'm exceptionally worried about the policing budget. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, next question, Assemblymember Polanski.
Thank you, Faye. There's been a lot of investment, or relative lot of investment, in changing LFB's culture, particularly in light of the culture review. What improvements have this made?
Okay. So obviously I've not, don't work in the environment, I haven't sort of been party of that. I understand there have been reports on very positively around the progress of that. But what I have observed in the conversations that I've been in is the enthusiasm and passion and commitment from Andy Rowe, I think, isn't it, to drive these changes through. And despite some of the financial challenges that he's got, this is a real clear commitment that he needs funding for and holding on to the money to make sure that sort of things happens. So although I'm not part of that organisation, what I'm observing from the meetings I've been in is a real clear commitment for those reforms to happen. It's an indication, really, if you like, of the cultural change or the drive for that cultural change to happen.
Yeah, I'm hearing that commitment from Andy too. In terms of measurable outcomes, how are you measuring if the money is working?
Okay, so I think, and I don't know if I've got some notes on this because it's not an area that I've been close to, but understand that there was a survey that was done back in 24 to monitor it, but I haven't got much more information. That is, it's not those things that I've done a significant amount of work on yet.
Would it be something you'd be willing to write to us with in terms of in future? We ask these questions of the Commissioner, so I perfectly know from his point of view what change looks like and what he's hoping to see. So we've got some clear measurables there. But it'd be good to know from your point of view too, to make sure that those two things align.
Something I can do a watching brief on going forward. Now I know it's something that this committee is interested in. This has been really helpful for me to understand those things, so I can keep a watching brief and then be alert to that in future.
So as a beginning to that watching brief, would you be okay with writing to us to say, okay, these are the things I'm looking out for, and then we know what that watching brief looks like? Brilliant. Thank you.
Assemblymember Harani.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is probably one of those areas, just continuing on the theme about cultural change, where actually on the ground visiting fire stations in my constituency, I've seen actually physically changes to buildings and also feedback from the staff about how things are working on the ground as well. So I'm actually quite pleased to see what's being said in front of us on the table from the Commissioner when he is here is actually being realised on the ground. Some of that is really important, given especially what we had with the report from His Majesty's Constabulary a couple of weeks ago now. But are you confident that, obviously we don't want to see that progress stop, so are you confident that that the work on cultural change will continue?
I'm confident that the work will continue. I do think with their budget position, it's a challenging situation for them to balance being able to run the service and still invest in those reforms. And I'm sure they're getting that balance right and continue to do that. So it's worth you exploring that. But I do understand and appreciate that that's a really challenging situation for them to be in.
Okay, sure. I think we'll dig into this deeper when.
Yep. Also on the 7th of January, in actual fact. Just check. I don't see any other indications. Just one sort of quick question from me. I think one of the problems that the LFB have had in the past was creating things like business cases for projects, for change projects, investor safe projects, those kinds of things. And I think they sort of, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but my impression of what they said to me was more or less, we weren't really very good at it and we weren't quite sure what we were doing. And they now, with their new finance director, their view to me was that they are better at it and they are on top of it. So I'm interested, I'm not asking you to, well, I am asking you really, do you agree that they have actually now got a grip of what is actually quite a fundamental finance process for an organisation that's trying to deliver some change?
I do. We have a lot of faith in their new finance director, and they've made a new appointment to an assistant director of finance as well, who has lots of experience doing central government Green Book style business cases, and we've seen that begin to transform the way they think about their investments, capital investment particularly. So yeah, we are very encouraged by the direction they're going in.
Okay. So begin to change and encourage by direction. That's not quite the same as they're definitely there, and
these
fully
things
on top of it.
Yeah.
It's
a complicated thing to do a
Yes.
Green Book compliant business case, and it takes expertise, and you need to embed it across. It's okay to have a couple of people at the top that know how to do it, but they can't do all of the work themselves, and it needs to be embedded and so on. But that is definitely going in the right direction.
So not quite there yet, but well underway. Is that a fair summary? Okay, I don't see any other indications. In that case, that brings us to the end of our first section of questions. Thank you very much, Faye and Elliot, for attending this morning and answering our questions. We will have a short adjournment now. What time is it? Yeah, let's have a short adjournment, 5 minutes, while we bring in our second panel. Thank you very much, everyone. I've now adjourned this meeting. Hello, welcome back to the Budget and Performance Committee meeting still this morning. We are still joined by Faye Hammond and Elliot Ball, and joining us additionally on our second panel are Charlie Hudson, who is the Director of GLA Group Collaboration, and Mary Harpley, who is the GLA Chief Officer. Good morning, welcome to the panel. We have now some questions on the GLA Group Collaboration and Savings project, led off by Assembly Member Roberts.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning. This is a question, I think, for Charlie. How has the work of the collaboration programme impacted the 25-26 budget proposals?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me this morning. So, first of all, I should say that all the functional bodies are involved in collaboration work, but not all functional bodies are involved with every project, and I've provided a bit of a breakdown of that. And so the budget for collaboration is agreed centrally and held at the portfolio level, but how that money is spent is agreed on by each of the functional bodies via the Group Collaboration Board. And the mission for Group Collaboration is to work as one, delivering maximum benefit to Londoners. And it's worth noting that when we think about what that means in terms of impact, we think about delivering against economy, effectiveness and efficiency, and whether it might partly contribute to a mayoral priority. So not all of the work is about financial savings. Having said that, there are a number of projects that do deliver financial savings. So to mention a couple of those, so we have an accommodation strategy which has overseen a suite of office moves which has saved a significant amount of money. We have an electric vehicle infrastructure delivery project which is in its infancy but will drive a revenue stream. And we also have just completed actually a Treasury collaboration project which will see some really significant returns, which is brilliant. We also have things that are in progress, so things like procurement, which has been around for quite a long time, which also delivers financial benefit. I just wanted to mention a couple of other things, though, which are not necessarily about direct financial benefit. So we have a number of pieces of work that help us to avoid cost. So we know that LLDC is reducing in size. We know that they're changing the way they work a little bit. And there's been a lot of collaboration across the functional bodies to both understand roles available and the people becoming available to make sure that we're not losing that talent. And in fact, we had a conversation with the LLDC Director of HR recently, and some of those moves have so far saved about £200,000 in redundancy payments. So there's a lot of kind of indirect costs, which I think are also, indirect cost savings, which I think are important to mention. Another one on that is something like the mentoring hub. So we've implemented a mentoring hub across the group, which has made put us in a position that each of the organisations doesn't need to purchase their own. And then just finally, there are a raft of projects that don't touch financial benefits, but do help those organisations to work more efficiently or effectively. And maybe just one example of that is on the development and now implementation of a group public health shared service. So that helps to ensure a consistent, high-quality public health advice and support across the group.
Thank you. Just thinking about the cyber attack on TfL IT services, has that had an impact on budget proposals for 25-26?
Yes, it has in a couple of different ways. So firstly, in terms of spend, so the IT projects that are in progress had to be understandably paused while resource was pulled away to deal with the critical incident that they needed to resolve. And actually, those resources haven't fully returned to the project yet. So there is a bit of a delay in some of the spend around that. And then there's also an impact on other projects. So, for example, impacts on things like the HR shared services where those interfaces have been.
If you had to, if you were pressed to come up with a figure as to how much this has cost in terms of, money and opportunity cost, how much would you think in the region, the ballpark, perhaps?
So I think that's really challenging to say until the team have returned and re-baselined. So there's two kind of lines of cost, I think. There's one, the known costs that we haven't spent because we haven't had the people, and then there's the unknown cost, which I would be very uncomfortable putting a number on until we've rebaselined that work.
Okay, when do you think that that work will complete?
So some people have returned to the project already. There's a soft start ongoing to make sure that things are continuing. The majority will return in the new year, and we'll have a rebaselined position in the early new year.
Okay. And as a result of this, the cyber attack, has that had an impact on MPS joining the shared service next year? And will that have a financial?
Which shared service are you talking about?
Well, I think it's going to be the things to do with all the IT and the collaboration program. And I understood, at least I may have been misinformed, that they were due to be joining.
No, MOPAC are.
MOPAC, sorry.
Yes, yeah. So there's actually two IT projects. There's one smaller one which is with LLDC, and the other more substantial one, which we're part way through delivery, which is with GLA, MOPAC, and OPDC.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Thank you. One further. So what level of savings is the collaborative procurement programme delivering, would you suggest?
So, as I've mentioned, that's not our sole focus, but we do have a number of savings, and I've outlined.
Focus.
Sorry.
But it's an important one.
It absolutely is.
It is the budget committee.
Absolutely is. So the EVID, the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Delivery Project, is due to, it's forecast to return about 6.6 million pounds, but that's over quite a long period of time. It's over 16 years, which is the period of the...
So was that 16 or 60?
16.
16, thank you.
Sorry,
I still out of the time, but yeah.
That infrastructure would be very good to last that long. We then have a range of savings related to office relocations, and that's for L&P moving to Union Street, LLDC to Endeavour Square, and the City Hall move. And there's more to come in that space. So in some of the original forecasts in the accommodation strategy, there were some locations that haven't happened yet. So the move of Pier Walk and Union Street to Palestra. And we also have, I mentioned earlier, we completed a Treasury collaboration project that is looking to deliver some really good returns. It's a commercially sensitive number, so if with your agreement, may I write to you afterwards with that number?
That will be helpful, thank you. If I may just one further, it's just on the 6.6. You said for electric vehicles over 16 years, was it?
Yes.
Given the fact that electric vehicle technology is moving at such a pace, and that we may not, in 5 years' time, 6 years' time, 7 years' time, we may not even be looking at electric vehicles. We may be looking at something entirely different, and you have to rip the entire thing up. Is that 6.6 return going to be achievable, do you think?
So I hope so. I think that return is based on really robust place now. So we've started delivering. In fact, some of those charging points are in the ground. So I think we've got more confidence in the estimates. They're also rapid chargers, so they're trying to push the kind of be as technically advanced as is possible, as you rightly say, in an environment of a very moving picture.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Georgie.
Thank you, Chair. How has the level of savings been set, and how are these being monitored?
Thank you. So, as it stands, we don't currently set a target level of savings. But as I've already outlined, and I won't go on to say again, we do have projects that do deliver financial benefits and cost avoidance. I think there may be some value in considering targets. The thing that I'm nervous about in this space is that the portfolio has quite a good range of projects against the three: economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And I think some of the projects have delivered really truly improved ways of working that we may not have prioritised if we were focusing on a financial target. And just to give you one example, if I may, there's been a piece of work done to bring together the GLA planning team, the GLA regeneration team and the TfL spatial planning team under one director delivering one service. They now have a new area-based approach. And the outcome, which I think is very valuable, is an improved level of service to the boroughs and a better pooling of that expertise. So that saves absolutely no money at all. And I think we've just got a tension between making sure we're delivering things that save money, because of course that's the space we should be in, whilst also delivering things that we think enable us to work better.
Do you think in future it would be more helpful to you and the sort of financial resilience of the mayoralty and the GLA to have targets?
Sure. Yeah.
So I think obviously Charlie's already mentioned the importance of seeing that overall perspective, but actually I take the point that it would be a good benchmark to have that kind of information. And as each of these projects arise, there was obviously business cases attached to them, and in terms of prioritising those resources, you need to consider the financial and the non-financial benefits of those. And I'm certainly, since I've been in place, Charlie and I've had some conversations about how those kind of things might be thinking and working. But I think obviously, as Charlie's already spoken about, it's a balance really to be got between that. But I do understand the importance of it. So I think we should take that one away and have a big think about it.
Yeah, I think the nature of my question very much is, the political direction and the intention of projects are not what we're questioning here. I think that part of the problem with not setting targets is that with any project, any major infrastructure project, whatever it be, I've yet to see one in political life where there has not been waste or ways that things can be done more efficiently. And therefore, sitting where you all sit at a top level, it's easier to sort of disassociate yourself from the decision making and more thinking about the financial well-being of each individual project. So given that, I'm glad to hear that it's something that you're willing to look at for future years.
So I can just comment a little bit more. What you've made me think a little bit around is how we can feed the collaboration, but I'm not sure how it happens at the moment, but how the collaboration board work group is doing can feed into the budget process that I'll operate next year for GLA. So I think that's something that, that's where that information sort of, and I'm not sure how that happens at the moment, not been here through this, been here long enough, but I think that's something that maybe need to give a bit of thought to.
Yeah. If I may just follow up on one point, because I think it speaks to your point. What we do understand is benefits at the project level. I think what you're saying is, should we be setting a target for a combination of those? We're in the process of implementing a slightly reoriented way of working. So we are seeking to develop, to understand collaboration projects, develop a function strategy across the group. So far we've got a set of projects which are great and they're delivering good things, but I would really like us to be clear on what we're trying to achieve by collaborating in a specific area across the group. So actually a pilot of this way of working is finance, and Elliot is very involved in this and may want to come in. But I think the reason I'm mentioning it now is because by thinking more strategically, what are all of the opportunities that we could consider, it allows the benefits to be compared up front to say, actually, that one's great, but it's really expensive and it doesn't give us as much as that one, and allows for that kind of a prioritisation process to happen. So I think there's some of that being built in.
No, thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you. Can I ask about the group renewable energy procurement strategy? So what savings are expected from it, how progress is going, and if you have a timeline?
Yes, thank you. So just to remind the Assembly members, this is a project to both procure GLA green energy from renewable sources via a power purchase agreement, and also to identify joint venture investment models that generate and provide clean energy. So the group PPA, there is also a TfL PPA, which is separate, but informs this work. but it only covers part of the GLA energy requirements. So the group PPA is all of the group, as well as TfL for part of their needs. The aim is to provide long-term price certainty and cost savings due to that reduced exposure to market volatility, and obviously to contribute to the pledge for net zero carbon city. And there's a further hope that there will be an opportunity to share some of that best practice as well later down the line. So in terms of the work streams, the group PPA have the project team, which is led by the head of energy at GLA, actually that one. They've completed a strategic outline business case, and they're currently undertaking pre-procurement and procurement activities, because they're hoping that they'll be able to use the Crown Commercial Services PPA framework, and that is being expected to be awarded in April. So there's a raft of work that they're doing now in preparation for that. So that they can be ready to ensure that we're oriented to make sure that meets our needs. And then on the renewable energy asset investment strategy work, the team are currently undertaking an options appraisal, which is, as you can imagine, very complicated and technical, and that is due for review in the new year. So by spring, we should be in a clearer position in terms of how the timelines and delivery of taking those forward.
Can I just check on the asset strategy? You said a review in the new year, so that means they've got the options already and they're going to review those options?
Sorry, they're actively working on the options and they'll be submitted for review next year. Sorry, apologies.
And how much of that will be in the public domain, or at least our domain, in terms of the options and when that submission is given?
I don't know the answer to that, but with your agreement, I will speak to the head of energy. I know I've already spoken to him about this project in particular and being here, because there's quite a lot of technical detail that I'm not as across, and he's very comfortable with doing a briefing note for this committee on where those things are at and what the next steps will be.
That'd be really great. And then the last question is just if you have any numbers, but maybe that needs to go in the briefing note too.
If that's okay.
No problem at all. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think that would be very welcome. Just looking around, I don't see any other indications on this. No. Okay, in that case, I think that's all of our questions. Thank you very much to our second panel. Thank you for answering our questions. We will now have a second short adjournment while we swap over to our third and final panel of this morning. So welcome back to the Budget and Performance Committee meeting this afternoon. We're now joined by our third panel of guests. We have Navpreet Rai, who's the Interim Assistant Director of Communities and Social Policy at the GLA. We have Tunde Olayinka, who's the Executive Director for Communities and Social Policy at the GLA. And we have Rupinder Pahar, who's the Head of Equalities at the GLA. Good afternoon and welcome to the Budget Performance Committee. Our first couple of questions from Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I think this question may be to Navpreet, but please do anyone in the panel chip in. So, can you describe the process that ensures that the Mayor's equality, diversity and inclusion strategy is informed in the 2025 budget proposals, 25-26?
There's a little button on the front that has like a little person. Perfect, the red light
Giving it away,
is on.
my first time.
That's no problem.
So the Mayor's 2018 All of Us strategy for equality, diversity and inclusion included the Mayor's former equality objectives. They were updated in November 2022, where a new set was published, which fulfills the GLA's obligations under the GLA Act and the public sector equality duty. These are the objectives that are reported on each year through the Mayor's annual equality report. And these are the objectives that have formed the kind of substantive overview of our organisational equalities priorities and are the ones that were included within the budget guidance that was issued this year. And the work funded within the new budget is also covered by these objectives, which include things like building genuinely affordable new homes, meeting Londoners' diverse housing needs, addressing barriers that are facing young people, and ensuring London's workforce reflects its population. So these objectives, as I said, are referred to in the budget guidance that was given to all functional bodies, and they apply. The GLA and MOPAC have to report against them, and the other functional bodies also have their own strategies and objectives, such as TfL's Equity in Motion and the London Fire Brigade's Togetherness strategy.
Thanks. That's helpful. So you described the targets, the objectives in the Mayor's strategy as the way to fulfil the public sector equality duty. But is there any separate assessment that's done to ensure the public sector equality duty is being fulfilled? Because obviously those objectives are not only equalities, but every time you produce a strategy that encompasses a lot of things and often encompasses various other objectives that might not be just equalities objectives, and also political objectives. So what other assessment is taken to ensure that the budget process is complying? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I don't know, Rupinder, if you want to...
Yeah, and just to make clear, so the strategy is now out of date, but it's the 22 objectives that are the ones that govern the work. Yeah, we don't have a strategy attached to the latest objectives. So within the organisation, we use equality impact assessments as a means of assessing how the organisation is meeting its statutory equality duties. While it's not a legally mandated tool, it tends to be the one that is used in the public sector. Each of the functional bodies have their own mechanisms for assessing equality. So while the GLA has a kind of EQIA framework and tool, the MOPAC inclusive impact assessment is slightly different and takes into account, for instance, the particularity, the kind of context in which they're working. TfL has a slightly different framework of its own to cover the fact that, you know, they deliver quite different projects to what the GLA is doing. So the work that my team does is it works with teams across the GLA to use the tool and the guidance to make sure that that their decision making is meeting the public sector equality duty. We make sure that the latest data and insights are guiding that decision making, and that they're using any kind of evaluation data, programme data, and any insights that they know about London's communities to guide that decision making.
And that's at the budget setting process, because I mean, obviously equality impact assessments are a tool. They're not perfect, but where they're done, at what stage in the process they're done, is really, really crucial. So that is done with your team's input at the budget setting process for each of the functional bodies.
So what we did was we produced, there was some kind of initial guidance that was produced around the budget, and that included some headlines around how to think about equality's impact in the submissions that functional bodies were making. So, for instance, we mentioned the equality objectives for the GLA and MOPAC. We talk about the kind of previous strategies that are relevant to the work that's being delivered, and provided guidance to teams to provide the kind of top lines around equalities within the budget. What we are trying to do until the kind of final publication of the budget is make sure that any additional equalities impact, any additional kind of insights and data that might be relevant is being fully integrated into that, and that is using an equality impact assessment framework.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just to very, very briefly add to that, I guess it's when each team is putting together its budget proposal, the budget's always going to be attached to a programme of work, and that's where the equality impact assessment works. So that's the interaction, in order to get back to your earlier question. Yeah. That's where the interaction takes place.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, how can I say this? It's making sure that money is spent across the group and all the functional bodies in the ways that has due regard for not basically spending it just on people who already have a lot of options. A lot of this is informed by my work with TfL, as you can imagine. It seems to be that you end up with lots and lots of different objectives and documents, all of which have come, at different people's interpretation, but actually then going back to where are you spending the money and who is it benefiting, sometimes then gets lost in the mix of all the documents. Do you think that would be, do you think that's fair? And is there anything that, are there improvements to the process that could be done that means that there's a bit more of a laser-guided focus to who is benefiting from the money you're spending?
So in terms of the specific groups impacted by programmes and policies that are being embedded in organisations, what an equality impact assessment tool does is it goes through the 9 protected characteristics. So you have to demonstrate, as I'm sure you'll know, for instance, for those covered by the age category, the gender category, etc., that this programme or policy is either improving outcomes for that group, or where it isn't directly supporting them, that there is some sort of mitigating impact. So you have to be able to demonstrate that, and you have to show that, the data on demographics in London, any programme evaluations from that programme that's been delivered, and research insights are shaping that decision making. And wherever possible, we encourage colleagues to think intersectionally about the impact as well. So, of course, we know people often are impacted by multiple sets of inequality at once. The tool guides you, certainly the GLA tool guides you through thinking through that as well. Yeah,
I think that the problem with that equality impact assessment is when is it done? Because, as you say, if it's done quite a long time down and budget decisions are already baked in, then your mitigation can be very, very limited. And without getting too much into the weeds of stuff, I've seen a lot of equality impact assessments, for instance, around changes to the bus network. And ultimately, because the bus network is used by more people who have protected characteristics, then maybe you're thinking, well, if the equality impact assessment was done a lot earlier on, about in terms of when the budget decisions are made, then you wouldn't have to be trying to reverse engineer some of these. And so I'm concerned that at the budget setting stage, whatever equality tools are used are not having enough of an impact that then you're doing them for the impact assessments far down, and there's really very little you can do apart from say yes. I read a lot that say yes, this is going to impact this group, and I'm like, Does that make sense? So I'm trying to get to what is not working at this early stage in terms of deciding what money is spent where.
So just one of the things that we are trying to do across the group is I think we're definitely on a journey. So this year, the Equalities team provided extra guidance to the functional bodies, and we will be working more closely with them between now and the final draft budget. So we provided some early comments which have been responded to, and there's kind of revised equality statements that the functional bodies have sent to the team, which we will work through before the final budget. And at that point, I think we will review what we do next year and what we can agree and require across the group, because we have some interaction and oversight, but it's not been formalised yet. Like I said, we've made improvements this year, but we will look at that again. The new governance processes and the mandates also offer a different opportunity for the Equalities team. So they will eventually end up in Merrill's decision documents, which will have equality sections in which we will work closely with teams to think about the equalities impacts and try to look across the suite of them. So it is an area that we are working on, and we will continue to make improvements to your point.
Thanks. That sounds hopeful.
It's just to build on the point that Nav made. We're in this area, we're always on a journey of continuous improvement because the demographics of London change over time. There's different groups, there's different needs. That's all part of the process. But in agreeing with Nav, I think we call her Nav. I think the new opportunity that we've got in starting these delivery plans from this new mayoral term mean that we're actually at the ground floor, working with teams. So to speak to the point about how early do we get in, we're getting in really early. We're seeing delivery plans, and we're able to influence them and add our expertise.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I would just like to point out that obviously you all get it. I would have quite liked to hear maybe from some of the finance people, because then you really understand whether the rest of the organisations are getting. But just briefly, just to talk about data, and this is really, I'm asking about data on London as a whole rather than sort of workforce data, because that's a little bit easier to control. So what steps need to be taken to ensure that the data that is used to make decision making in both GLA group and functional bodies is up to date? Because certainly you've had conversations with TfL where they accept that they're not always collecting the right data in order to be able to make those early decisions. Are there any other gaps you've identified, and what work can be done to update that?
So in terms of, and I'm sure you will cover after me on this, ensuring that GLA teams are using the correct data and being pointed in the correct direction, we have a corporate policy engagement and delivery guide that sets out where you can go to find sources of data, what good data looks like, and also has a section there on what you need to do to address equalities issues. There's also that makes accessible the things you can get through City Intelligence, the data store, which is kind of regularly updated. Additionally, for example, within my team, there is the community engagement team. There are, we have various stakeholder fora, equality stakeholder fora, for example, the deaf and disabled people's organisations groups. So those, that community engagement team, the stakeholder fora, and in fact the EDI advisory group, which my team also runs, provide kind of live feedback about how different groups are being impacted. The City Intelligence Unit also does kind of a opinion research to see how Londoners are faring on a kind of real-time basis. So teams will also draw on that. And Rupinder probably can expand on this, but the team have also rolled out a quality impact tool, which is a new tool which guides people through the process of where do you find good data, what data do you need to make good decisions. So I don't know if you...
Can I just briefly add to that, because I don't know which one of you want to... Is, so does that also make that guidance, I'm not sure, we may have it, sorry, I'm not regularly on this committee, we may have it, but it would be great to see. Does that also make recommendations about when functional bodies collect data, what's the best practice of doing that, making sure they're disaggregating data and things like that? Is that included in the guidance, and do you sort of check in on that? I'm not sure who that's...
Yeah, so I can respond on that. So in terms of the equality impact assessment guidance, we're working closely with City Intelligence Unit colleagues to produce information guides on each of the protected characteristics and wider issues that colleagues may want to think through, particularly because we try to factor in intersectionality in our equalities decision making. I would also add that we use evaluation data from existing programmes. So we also, these are iterative impact assessments. It's not actually kind of partly responding to your earlier question. It's not that we're only doing it at the initial stage of a programme. We work with teams to revisit it, in 3 months down the line, 6 months, etc., to make sure that when they're getting those insights from the programme being delivered, they're adapting the programme appropriately to make sure that it's still continuing to meet the needs of Londoners. So as Naz says, we have the City Intelligence Unit provides a lot of the qualitative data, so things like census information, research that we may commission or that is relevant to the work of the GLA. We also we can gather those qualitative insights through the various stakeholder fora that, for instance, our Deputy Mayor for Communities and Social Justice leads, and that kind of individual work that our unit in particular does with communities. In terms of the wider functional bodies, they all have their own equality impact assessment frameworks and guidance. So I think I'd mentioned the MOPAC one, so their inclusive assessment guidance. TfL, obviously, the kind of scope of the work they do is so significant that they've got 2 sets of equality impact assessment frameworks. So they have one for HR and corporate decision making. They have a second for their external, infrastructure projects and programs, which you'll probably know about. So what we are trying to do, which I think we said earlier, is create a much more connected network across the functional bodies, because as well as us being able to share our good practice, of course, we want to learn from what they're doing. Yeah. So one example being that TfL has a really quite useful digital tool, actually, that colleagues can use, which has kind of really easy to use drop-down menus and clickable boxes that just allow them to process the decision-making in a more accessible way. That's something that we're trying to think about replicating with the GLA's tool. So, yeah, it's not just us kind of telling other GLA group colleagues what we think they should be doing. We also want to learn from their practice. But, yeah, so I hope that responds to your question about the wider GLA group as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. But just to say, I mean, TfL love a process, so yeah, no, absolutely. But there are gaps in their data, and they don't always disaggregate data. And I'm absolutely sure that's not just TfL, and that's across functional bodies as well. So is that something that is part of your guidance in terms of making sure that there's a standard way that they collect and present data?
We do make recommendations in the GLA tool around the types of evidence that they can access. Yeah. And as I say, because we're producing the information guides with CIU, we can do that quality control around how they're accessing some of that information. But what we can do is review the tool and see that we're really clearly stating that to take on the advice from you.
Okay. Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thank you. Morning, panel. It's following on from Assembly Member Baker's question really there about TfL. It's across the whole group, are there differences in EDI in terms of what the approaches are, and if so, what are those differences? Sorry. Thanks.
Yeah. So there's very different contexts for all the organisations, and while we try to collaborate, we're really mindful of, one solution that we suggest as the GLA may not be quite appropriate to another one. But in terms of the differences, there's specific differences around the processes. So as I say, we all have slightly different equality impact assessment tools and guides that we draw upon. We do community engagement. Everyone has their own community engagement function, and we try to work really closely actually with certainly MOPAC and TfL community engagement colleagues. But there will be slight differences in how they need to engage stakeholders, at what stage they're doing so, and the sort of insights that they're developing. But also one example of how we actively collaborate there is the EDI Advisory Group and the Deaf and Disabled People's Organisations Forum that the GLA runs, which Nav mentioned, will invite TfL colleagues in to speak to stakeholders. For instance, the bus bypass consultation that the TfL team have been doing for the last few months, we've invited them in to speak to our stakeholders and make sure they're getting those insights there. But sorry, to go back to your question about process, so there's actual differences in the tools and resources that we use. There's differences in the context that we're operating within, but we are trying to kind of make sure that we all learn from each other and share practice as well.
Thank you. And genuinely not just trying to catch you up, but it caught my ears that you said you work with MOPAC and TfL on community engagement, but you didn't say the London Fire Brigade. Is there a reason for that?
No, just that in recent months we've worked more closely with those two, but we have worked with LFB, for instance, on the engagement around their strategy on fire safety. So we worked with them last year. We actually hosted an event at City Hall as a collaborative event with our Deaf and Disabled People's Organisation stakeholders to inform the work they were doing. So we do try to work collaboratively with them, just more recent examples with the other functional bodies.
Thank you. And is there a place to get to where there's a best practice that recognises all the differences that you correctly outlined, but actually you go, this is the basic standard of where everything needs to get to?
That is something that we're trying to move towards through this kind of collaboration network and having it a bit more formalised going forward, where we can say, you know, these are the kind of principles that we actually do agree upon as the GLA group. And actually, even if there's a kind of slightly different context, that's what we're kind of upholding. But we're still kind of, I think we're trying to build that kind of trust relationship.
Makes sense. Nav, I didn't know if you wanted to come in.
I was about to say the same. So the next step on that journey is working together between now and the publication of the final budget. So I think I said before we've done step one, which is more building on last year. So the Equalities team providing further guidance to all the functional bodies. And the functional bodies responding to that, and so step two is now looking at we provided these comments, let's work together to see what more we can do. I think one of the things we did find when we reviewed the initial equalities comments was that the functional bodies in the first drafts at least weren't necessarily outlining all that they were doing, because there is a lot of work going on. There's been the culture review. There, MOPAC is setting up a whole unit, which I'm sure you'll hear about because you've got meetings with each of them on EDI, and so just making sure that they are, as well as where there are gaps, just reflecting what is going on, and I think there is work to do there, which we will definitely try and build on for the publication of the final budget.
Thanks. And again, just as finally, so this is Budget and Performance Committee, and we're kind of talking performance here, but in terms of budget, as things are getting tighter, have there been times where you think, actually, there's so much more we could be doing, but I'm being told we can't because there's not budget?
I think we try to do what we can within the budgets that we have. I think there's, I think the process that we've been going through, I can see where we can make improvements within the budgets that we have. I think we will review the process once we get to the draft, to the final budget, and see if there are areas where, if there are areas where extra budget would be beneficial, we would make that case and put that forward. But I think for now, there are areas that we could improve on and are improving on before that.
Yeah, and just going forward, I mean, my last role before I came to the GLA was in the local authority, and as we know, those of us from who used to work in local authorities, it forces you positively to be a lot more creative, a lot more collaborative. when you've got budget considerations. And I've been really heartened by the new process and the new sort of cross-cutting committees that we've got in supporting the Mayor's delivery for this year. It's brought a lot of people together from across different GLA units to work on cross-cutting themes like health and like equality. And I think there's lots of efficiencies you can find in there.
Thank you.
Sorry, just to add to that, and I suppose, you know, the public sector equality duty as well, you know, you need to be proportionate in what you do as well. So I think considering that, so that the Mayor's kind of policies and wishes and meeting those whilst making sure that we are using money well.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Georgiou, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. What is the total cost of the Mayor's EDI strategy across the GLA?
Sorry, in terms of we don't have an external strategy. As we mentioned, we've got the current 22 equality objectives.
Fine. In terms of the work that you do in meeting those objectives, how much money would you say has been spent? I mean, you can chalk that up to whatever you want, staff time, external, you know, consultants, what, you know, there may not be any, but the point I'm trying to make is, in achieving the Mayor's objectives, how much do you think that's cost?
The current equality objectives cover quite a huge range of work, ranging from housing, community engagement, community safety, etc. So personally, I would need to go away and find the total.
Yes, so if you're asking us how much, in terms of all of the objectives, that cut across the whole of the GLA group and so on and so forth, we don't have that figure with us, but we can do that analysis. If you're talking about the team, and just within the GLA, I don't know if we've got that figure with us, but we probably can get that figure to you quite quickly. If you're talking about all of the teams embedded in all of the different group organisations, again, we will need to go away and bring that figure to you.
In terms of the equalities team, the budget is, you know, I think 100,000 for the year, but that covers a range of things that the specific equalities team does, and we can get you the figures for the number of people within the team and their costs.
And that's excluding staffing, of course.
Yeah, that excludes staffing, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 100,000 wouldn't get you very far. So it'd be good to. Yeah. So I think to help, what would if either all three of you write to me or to the committee, essentially what I'm trying to work out, because with any member of staff that you employ, any project that you embark on doing what you want to achieve, which your jobs are to implement the Mayor's objectives, it's good to know how much things are costing in order and what the outcomes are in order to assess where we are. My second question, there's been a lot of back and forth between, I think at various points, the three of you and Assembly Member Baker on EQIAs. And this comes back to my outcome point, which is there have been successive decisions, policies, projects that have been implemented by the GLA, which have hit the disabled, those from ethnic minorities, those that are older, those that are disabled, pregnant women, you know, many of the protected characteristics. So when that does occur, and you've spent a lot of time and resource of which we'll get the figures on, you know, what's the feedback that you provide to people leading those projects saying, well, why haven't you listened to the EQIA? You know, you've just sort of gone and done what you wanted to do without looking at how this impacts on Londoners with protected characteristics.
So I can speak to how the equality impact assessment is carried out. Usually it happens at the beginning of a policy or a programme. So actually the programme would be amended in line with what we understand the equalities impact to be. So if we do understand that there's a disproportionate impact on a particular community, it would be identified at that early stage, and then the programmes are amended accordingly.
It's identified, but there's many a project that does not take those things into account. It may register the fact that it will have a knock-on effect on people, but the decision is still made. So therefore, you've spent a lot of time and money on taxpayers' money on the EQIA, rightly so, but then at the end of it, once the decision's been made past the consultation phase and implemented, the impact still remains on those people. So therefore, I raise the point again, I don't think anyone disagrees with the concept of an EQI. I think they're very good things, and they show actually how Londoners possibly benefit or are hurt by certain decisions. To me, it strikes, once you've gone down that route, you guys have done a brilliant job in producing these documents, that once they're ignored, there's sort of a loss of value for money in doing all that great work.
So one of the things that we do to bring in continual equalities insights is we have the EDI advisory group where we invite GLA teams to talk to their work and have the insights of representatives of various stakeholder groups. We also have equality stakeholder fora which cover different diversity characteristics, who again talk to teams about the impact that projects either will have or are having, and then we do ask teams to report back on how they would be mitigating some of those impacts. And the community engagement team again brings in insights from London's diverse communities. So we do engage in a continual process where we are highlighting where things may need to be addressed.
Can I just add something on the process? So what Nav says is quite important in terms of the mitigation. So what you have to do in an equality impact assessment is not simply identify, we think there will be a disproportionate impact on this group. You have to show what the mitigation would be. So you would say, we'll change the programme in this way, or we will implement it for a pilot phase of, maybe 3 months, and then we will review and make any changes that need to happen. So the intent of an equality impact assessment isn't only to highlight that there's issues, but actually to show what we're going to do to address them.
I would hope that all colleagues know what an EQI is, how to read it, and what the mitigation factors are. The point being, there are certain decisions made where you spent a lot of time and money on in addressing and saying what the mitigation should be, where once the decision is made, will still have a significant impact on people with protected characteristics. Now, I could go down the road of listing the ones that I know of, but quite frankly, it'd all kick off on this committee and we'd waste a lot of time. So I'm happy to have a sit down possibly with 1 or 3 of you to talk through what the end point of what I'm trying to address is, where you've spent a lot of time and money, taxpayer money and time, in producing these EQIs, looking at the mitigating factors, but then the decision's still being made whilst essentially ignoring the EQIA once the decision goes through. But I'm happy to do that outside of this meeting. So thank you all for your time.
I don't think it ever kicks off on this committee. We're very calm and collected. Assemblymember Hall.
Thank you. Can I just ask
Let me say, those last two statements are not connected. Assemblymember Hall.
I don't know what you mean. Can you tell me, please, who is in charge of your budget? Which officer? Yeah.
Is it that one? Yeah, that's me for the equalities budget, Rupinder's team, if that's the question that you were asking.
And NAV reports to me.
But say that again, sorry.
NAV reports to me, but NAV operationally manages the budget.
You manage the budget. So what is your budget? Is your budget 100k?
For the equalities team work, yes, that's how much it is for the equalities team.
So that
excluding staffing.
Which is going to be the biggest sum. So if you're in charge of the whole budget, what is the entire budget?
I don't know. I would have to check that and come back to you.
No, the budget you're in charge of, you must know how much that is.
For the entire communities and social policy unit, or just
for we're talking about today equalities. So all of the things that you've been talking about today, how much we're trying to get, because it's no good saying it's 100k, but then there's wages, because I've no idea how many people work in that particular department.
So there's me, we have 1 principal officer and 5 officers in that team, junior officers.
Okay, do you know what that costs?
Again, I can dig out the data in a spreadsheet. I don't have it immediately available, but we do have that information.
Okay, so overall, who's in charge of the budgets for this particular area? Is it you, Tunde?
Yes, I'm responsible for the budgets for the whole of the Communities and Skills Directorates. Communities and Social Policy, which NAV looks after, doesn't just contain the equality team, it also contains the economic hardship team, the migration team, as well as, what's the other team?
Community engagement.
Community engagement. So I think the reason officers are finding it a bit difficult is because they all do a bit of EDI, but this is a specialist EDI team in charge of monitoring the objectives.
All right,
and so
the
on
specialist EDI team,
Yeah.
how much does that cost, including staffing?
I haven't got that figure with me. I can probably look it up during the course of this meeting, but I haven't got that figure.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know. If you're the budget holder,
Yeah.
then you'll have access to it. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
No worries.
I think you might have to be quicker than you imagine, because since no one else is indicating, I think that was our final question. So
Okay.
I'm sure
Unless-
it's
I was
easy
gonna
to.
say-
No, I'm sure you're. I mean, you're the budget holder. It would take seconds.
Hopefully.
I don't think we're going to do the thing where no one's allowed to leave till we have the number. What I will say
That is a bit of pressure.
is you can absolutely write to us,
Okay.
and if literally that's 10 minutes from now, that would be brilliant. If it is that quick. So I don't see any other indication. So that brings our questions for our third panel to an end. Thank you very much for attending our meeting this afternoon and answering our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Noted. Excellent. And can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with the party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? And regarding our work programme, can I ask the committee to note the committee's work programme and its dates? Noted. Brilliant. Next meeting of the committee will be held on the 17th of December, next Tuesday, here in the chamber at City Hall at 10 a.m. I have no urgent business today, so that concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.